Hello, and welcome to our second Queer History panel with 2S LGBTQ AI members of our community. Today we have a diverse panel that are here to tell their stories and share with you. I'm Michelle Fortin, honored to be co-chair of the Vancouver Pride Society. I'm also Executive Director at Options for Sexual Health, and we'll be right back.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Queer History panel. Thank you for tuning in to learn more about the communities that we serve. The first Pride was a riot, an event that sparked revolutionary ideas and brought us together to take a stand for respect and for our rights. It's important for us to remember that deeply rooted history while we take the time to also celebrate the progress that we've made. It's an opportunity for us to stand together against some of the injustices that we still face each and every single day. This is just one of many reasons that Clio is really excited to partner with Vancouver Pride for the annual Queer History panel. It's crucial to start recording the past of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community so that we can learn, honor, and respect those before us. It's incredibly important that we also continue to learn about our history and the experiences of other members of our community. So we've engaged 5 local activists and experts to discuss queer history rooted in what's colonially known as Vancouver, facilitated by Vancouver Pride Society's board co-chair and executive director for Options for Sexual Health, Michelle Thornton. This marks the second year for the panel, and we hope this insightful virtual programming will continue into the future. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for sharing their insights and lived experiences, and we encourage you all to keep the conversation going after the show. On behalf of everyone at Clio, welcome to Vancouver Pride's 2021 Queer History panel. Happy Pride, y'all.
Hi, so really excited about the number of amazing folks from our community that are here today, and pleased to introduce our first panelist. Fatima Jaffer has been doing work in our community, capturing moments with her lens, as well as promoting the queer community through Tricone. And Fatima, I didn't realize that you were originally from Kenya. So maybe you can tell folks a little bit more about who you are and what's important to you.
Straight off the bat. Okay. So I facilitate Tricone, which is Tricone Vancouver, which is a South Asian queer group in the Lower Mainland since 2005. And we actually formed around Pride. I come from Kenya. I was born in colonization, so while it was still colonized by the British. I'm older than I look, people tell me. I guess it's, Kenya is a huge part of my identity. And then, of course, I'm Indian from Kutch. But I've been living for 4 generations in Kenya. I mean, we were. And then I came here for political reasons. My family lived in Vancouver. I lived in Montreal and Toronto and so on. So ended up here. It's the weirdest thing.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Michelle.
And I think it's actually perfect that we'll move on to Travis. So Travis, you are a Jack and Jill of all trades. You are a foster parent. You are part of the Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society. You hold many titles, and we're really pleased to have you here today. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your Nisga'a name And I know that you presented your wolf staff representing the matriarchs in your family.
Thank you very much. My Nisku name is Nisku. Nias it represents either master, teacher, or grandfather, and Mu is of a slave. When I was given that name, when my house chief, now my uncle, got his chieftain name, I was given the name Nias Mu by my grandmother that sat around, and it was because of the work that I did. Every time that I did any kind of work, people just came to come help me. It wasn't because I had slaves, it was because people just came to help do the work that I needed to do. I am a foster parent of 3 Aboriginal children with Backfast here in Vancouver. I was, for 12 years, sitting with the Nisku Nation in governance, and I finished my term of office in October of this year. I became a foster parent because of my term of office. My platform was children in care, and in order for me to understand and really relate to the platform itself, I became a foster parent. Life-changing. Yeah. I don't recommend becoming a parent at 50 years old, but but it is life-changing, and literally I feel in my 20s. My children have brought my age back down, although I'm tired most of the time, but I still feel 20. I do continuously do a lot of work in the community. I'm very community involved with a lot of the neighborhood societies, food banks through COVID, and just being able to offer and express our Two-Spirit people along that way, to really honor our Indigenous people in every area that I take in my life, that I acknowledge, and that I actually hold them up along with me. Given that most of the communities through Vancouver are trying to build on that community level under reconciliation and with all of, I am a generational product of the residential school. Both my parents were in residential school, but I am in a class action suit for the Federal Indian Day School, which is long process, but very traumatizing, rebringing all of that back up again. But it's things that we have to work through in our days. And COVID has taken a toll on everybody because it's brought, it continuously brings up more and more of all of their life history and traumas that they faced today now, that we have to be able to work towards, that we were able to work towards finding balance under the wellness wheel. So my hands go up to everybody that has really acknowledged and survived through COVID this year, and continue the work that you do. Thanking everybody for all their community services in that area. Thank you.
Well, I hold my hands up to you, and thank you for spending the time with us today. Next to Travis, we have Chrissy Taylor. Chrissy uses they, them pronouns. And I know Chrissy because they were on the board of the Vancouver Pride Society when I was not. I was at the Dyke March. And Chrissy, I've watched you kind of grow in terms of your activist life at Vancouver Pride, and then Fierté Canada Pride, and then Interpride, and still with those 2 organizations, as well as your own personal trajectory with school. And I know you've got a master's in counseling now and are doing some great work with folks that are trying to support queer youth. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what's going on with you.
Sure. I'm nearly done the master's in counseling. I haven't quite finished it yet. I'm just in the final stages of it. So eventually that'll be done. I'm involved with Fierté Canada Pride, like you said. I'm the ambassador for the Trans and Gender Diverse Council. That is a leadership council for the organization. We're called the Angry Flamingos. And so I kind of am this bridge person between the organization and the trans and gender diverse community nationally. And so it's an interesting group because we kind of formed at a FCP, Fierté Canada Pride conference, when when there wasn't a lot of inclusion for trans folks, and so we got really angry and mad and stood up and made a bunch of demands, and that group of people has really grown over the years, and now it's kind of become this group where trans activists and organizers can connect from across the country, and there's a lot of people now who have never been involved in Pride, don't really care about Pride, don't care to be involved with Pride, and so we're able to connect and share resources around how to like lobby for trans healthcare and change legislation and stuff like that across the country, because it's very different depending on where you are. So yeah, I'm still involved in that, and then with Interpride, I'm on the Solidarity Committee. I'm a co-chair of that, which gives out grants to organizations and individuals in the global South and East, where they're trying to put on some kind of queer trans event, and so we give out those grants. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you've got tons of time.
Lots of time. Yeah.
Thanks for being with us today. So next we have T. Carrington. And T is a member of our very diverse queer community and works at Touchstone Family Association doing youth mentorship. But even more importantly, has kept the beat going in the community for over 18 years at a number of different clubs as a DJ. So I remember very, very well on Abbott, as well as the Fortune Sound Club, on East Pender, Cobalt, on Main Street, and most recently at the Junction on Davie. So you have been shifting people's feet and probably their hearts and minds as well. So T, you want to talk a little bit more about what's important to you in the community?
So what's important, as I've grown up in Vancouver and my whole life, learning about queer history for people of color was not very talked about, and of being Jamaican descent, it's not a thing. So I think that for the upcoming generations, it's definitely a very important thing that we're doing here and discussing.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really happy to have you here and your perspective, because I think that that's incredibly important, especially as Pride moves into this kind of next tenure, which is a lot of change that's reflective of the broader community. And then last but definitely not least, Al Houston is with us, and Al, like Travis, has been a member of the Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society for quite a few years, and has participated and really created opportunities for the 2S LGBTQAI community in Vancouver to get a sense of ritual and celebration that has an Indigenous connection. I've been honored to be at a number of events and had the down ritual that you are a part of. So Al, do you want to talk a little bit about your very rich history in our community?
I came to Vancouver in the early 90s, but I was in Toronto first. I'm originally from Manitoba, but I just had to discover who I was. And when I came to Vancouver, I realized that there was a group called the Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society in '92 that celebrated gay natives. But we identify ourselves as being Two-Spirit because Two-Spirit means that we house the soul of a man, but also have the compassion soul of a woman. I identify on both sides because my alter ego, being Shelley, is a very strong person. She's wise, she's very calm. It's just who I am. It's a part of who I am. I'm always the one to put up my hand first because my mother taught me, if you've got what it takes, you don't wait for others' hands to go up. Yours goes up first, and that's always been close to my heart, a credo to keep, and it really helps me to project that person that I need others to know who I am. So it's very helpful, and I believe I'm a very strong person in both sides of who Al is. And I say who I am versus what I am, because that makes a whole difference when you believe in who you are. You bring out the better sides of you.
Absolutely. Well, I am glad that all of you is here with us. And we're excited to have some opportunity to talk a little bit about what it was like for each of you coming out. It might have been here in Vancouver, so if you have a Vancouver specific story, that would be great. But even more importantly, like what was your coming out story that that you first shared with family or friends or community? Anyone want to start?
I'd have to go way back. I'm 52 now, and I think growing up in our community, in a very remote community, we just got a road in the year 2000, connecting us to the rest of our nation, the Nisga'a Nation. And growing up in that community, I was different. I knew I was different. I liked boys. I knew that. I liked to play house. I liked to be the girl. I liked to be the mom. I mothered my cousins and my nieces when there was a lot of alcoholism in our community as well. But there was a lot of people that preyed upon myself as well as a child. So I went through that part of the history, and knowing that I was different, I grew up and not knowing what that meant. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but growing up, other people did. They knew I was different. I never heard the term gay in our community, on our reserve or anything like that. I never heard the term two-spirit. Since decolonization, we've had a lot of those terms that have been taken away from us and stripped out of our cultures and traditions. So by the time that I turned 13, 14, 15, we moved to Port Edward, which is a city, and then people knew I was different, but that's where I heard the term gay, and I was scared. It was being able to hide in my own skin and hide behind a smile that everybody thinks is okay, that you're okay because you're smiling, and nobody ever sees the hurt that you carry behind that. So living in that life, I was scared. I was scared to even admit that I was gay. I knew I was. Everybody knew I was. Everybody knew I was different, but I was terrified to admit that. I turned 20. I finally moved down in 1994 to Vancouver and lived with one of my friends. I came out around then. I made an Indian blanket for my father, and I sent a letter with it. It was a Aboriginal convention that they had on our reserve, and the letter was my coming out letter. It was to explain the blanket first, that all of my love and who I am went into that blanket, and that it's not any different than what I was taught throughout my lifetime and my culture. And that I wrapped myself around him and my family, and that was me. And I knew I was taking a chance on possibilities of being disowned, which would never happen. My mom would always say that I bore you from me. You're my child. This stuff. And what I expected to be really, really a bad situation turned out to be very different for me. But mind you, I stayed drunk 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after sending that letter because I wasn't sure where that was going to go, until finally I sobered up and phoned home and cried with my mom. I mean, their understanding of being on the reserve and being back home, their understanding of gay people was automatically AIDS. It was death right away. There was no teachings. There was no knowledge of who we are as individuals. Knowing that I was gay and accepting that finally in my 20s, it was 35, I think, when I finally met Desiree. And that was my female persona. I believe that you can go through life and not know that you have both those spirits, but when you do find, as Al was saying, you do find and welcome that second spirit into your life, your life thrives a lot more. Desiree is a very motherly, very busy lady. She can power drink more than I can, and still walk in heels. But does a lot of things. I as Desiree, have adopted about 18 children to build the Nisku family in Vancouver. 18 children that hold that name as their last name. And looking towards being able to offer that home and be able to continuously paved that road that has been there before us. That people that come from my reserve or my nation know that I've walked this path over and over and over and over, so that you do not have to trip over anything. So that it's a lot smoother than when I started on that path, and that it's ready for them. And to know that coming to Vancouver, that having to be with GVNCS was a home away from home, and realizing there is a family here. But growing up in through the smaller communities up north, you're a stereotype for being Indian, for being gay, for being overweight, so there was so many check marks that had gone against me at that time. But it was fear of knowledge. And going forward, having to be able to, as T had mentioned, is really expressing the history of where we came from and teaching people along the way so that they'll understand that we, as individuals, have walked those paths in order for our next generations to come walking behind us. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that there was ritual and that you wrote it down. It's like you writing it down means you can't take it back. Yeah, I really love that. Thank you.
In Kenya, what was happening was, well, homosexuality wasn't really being talked about at all, but it was practiced. So it's when the name came that it became dangerous to be that. So, and the naming was coming from the West. So it kept me in the closet for many years because I thought being gay or lesbian, once I heard the term, would make me white. So, and that I would lose who I was, and I would lose my culture and my connection to my family and everything, and community. And then I came, I came out in so many different ways and so many different times. I always knew, you know when you're a kid, in a sense, but you don't know what it is. And then eventually, it was here in Vancouver, actually. I had many escapades all the way through school and stuff, but I said the words, I guess, and so this is a different kind of coming out, the way that we understand it here. And that's when I met the first South Asian queer person, lesbian actually, back in 1990. And then came out quite late in my life. And then ever since then, I feel like I'm always coming out. I'm just coming out in different ways. Every time I hear a different history or, I learn something new and I think, well, there's parts of me I haven't really explored, and I'm coming out all the time. So, yeah, I think it's a process, and I don't actually use that word coming out so much as I'm still looking for language for it. That's our own, in a sense of being broader and just about us being who we are, intersectional in so many ways, right? So, anyway.
Yeah, it's that process of becoming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No matter how I identified, before I identified as queer, I was still me. And I think it's interesting, that idea of what's the other language we could use for
And I think
for coming out or coming in.
right, in the sense that it's about history, it's about race, it's about colonization, it's about where you are, lands you're on, and our processes of being who we are, learning pieces of who we are. And I think we're all doing it, right, in different ways, all the time. So, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I can relate on the stigmatism of what being gay would be. Being Jamaican, quite a bit of our music actually is very homophobic, and ways of during the lyrics, I should say, is ways of harming and dismembering and that's music that's used to celebrate at parties and family functions. But my family has always been has not been of that thought. It was, my family's been very inclusive. so when I had come out, I was 16. I had told my grandma first, actually, and my grandma was the most understanding lady, and I remember being like just terrified to say it, but not because it was her. And I remember her going, "So how are you going to tell your mom?" and I was like, "Oh, right." So I like skirted around that one and asked my dad to tell my mom instead. And at that time I came out as bi because I was like, "Oh, I mean, I think men are attractive, so then I must like them then." And so a week goes by and I'm DJing at like celebrities, the renovated celebrities, and I there's a girl that I like, but my mom's there, so I'm like, does she know yet? Can I talk to this girl? How do I work this? And I've talked to my dad, and my dad's like, oh yeah, no, I definitely told her last week, told her the day, and I was like, oh, so we're not talking about this. That's cool. And when I finally mustered up the courage, my mom cried for like 2 hours. And then I'm just like letting her cry, and I'm sitting there, and I was like, oh, okay. So are we gonna go any further? We're just sticking at the tears. What's going on? And she's like, well, I wanted grandchildren. I was like, I don't recall saying I didn't want children. And then she's like, oh, okay, we're good then. So I was so grateful and lucky to have that with my family, but know that the outer world, it wasn't as welcoming and open. And that was a frustrating period of my life in some points, but also really great memories as well.
Awesome.
I have to say, in my case, I always knew, as a youngster and growing up, being teased in school, it's like you're either, well, we were doing genders, I believe. It was feminine, masculine, or neuter. So one of my classmates came up to me and she says, you're either a neuter or you're a feminine, because you sure ain't no masculine. And that's like grade 3. And it's like, that's kind of like where I started thinking, she might be onto something here. And as I grew up, I knew that I was attracted to men more than women. But again, I too came out as bi. But it was more or less to give my mother the hope. Don't give up on me just yet, And then I married, and I had 5 beautiful children, and they all started having children, so I have 13 grandchildren, and I even have great-grandchildren, believe it or not. But I mean, that was part of what I needed in my life as well, was to have that family. So there's my family going, and they're all supportive of Grandpa being gay. It's like it's no big deal to them, They feel safe, they feel, loved, they feel, accepted. And as I mentioned earlier, I have members of my family coming to me for help and saying, oh yes, my child is gay. How do I speak to them? I says, how would you normally speak to them if you didn't know? I mean, it's now you know who their choices for their bedroom, but is that really any of your business? When I told my mother and finally came out as gay, she sent me a letter 2 years later. 2 years. I was living in Toronto, and in her letter she explained, I always knew, but it was the fate I didn't choose for you. I was afraid for, because you're so happy-go-lucky and everybody loves you in the world, and that type of person, and one day you're going to get hurt because of it. And that was her fear. And it's like, you have to trust me a little better than that, Mom. I says, I've got a heart, I've got 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a brain, I'm no dummy, but I'm a lot clearer in my thinking now that I'm able to accept who I am. And that's my story.
That leaves you, Chrissy.
Yeah. I was just just been thinking about the words coming out, and I feel like I'm always coming out. Like it's not just this one time and place in my history. So I grew up in Northern Ireland, and it's the most conservative place in the UK, and they were kind of recently forced to have like equal marriage because the rest of the UK already had, and then we didn't have a government for a bit, so they just shoved it through. But yeah, still it's the most conservative, and I grew up in this weird place where my family wasn't Catholic or Protestant, and my mom is Buddhist, and so, which is one of the very few Buddhists in Northern Ireland, and so I just kind of like went through always kind of feeling not the same and as everyone else, and my mom like is like very into the environment, and people at home are not into the environment and are very like, she like created allotments for people to grow vegetables in the town that we lived in, and now looking back on that, I'm like, this is amazing. Like I've learned a lot from you, but at the time I was like, oh, you're so weird. It's not the norm. It's like I want to like fit in with everyone. But that being said, so I wasn't like religious necessarily growing up, but lived in a very religious culture, and in terms of my coming out, like I think I had feelings from a very young age, and there was absolutely no language to put on that. Queer people were not talked about in Northern Ireland, but I started to feel these things, and my first place to go to was my friends, and they were like, oh, like that's not okay, like that's, you know, we need to help you like fix this, we need to whatever. And at that time I'd also become a born again Christian, so it wasn't like something I had grown up with. It's something that I like chosen to be, which is strange looking back on this now. And so I thought I needed to fix myself, and so I put myself into reparative therapy, and got connected with a church where they taught me to try and control my thoughts and feelings towards women, and to discipline myself when those things came up, and to have good mentors in my life of heterosexual relationships that I should focus on and learn from. Gave me all these books to read, and to find the root cause of why these things were coming up, to then be able to work through it. And then I moved to Canada, and I'd started that process maybe 6 months before I moved to Canada, and coming to Canada was a big change, and it was hard because I was this devout born again Christian, and I moved into residence at UBC where nobody was devout born again Christian, and everyone was totally okay with people being queer, and I went into this like really hard place of just not being able to reconcile my faith and religion with my sexuality, and it ended up in this back and forth for a couple of years of, when I was at school, I would like just like put my religion to the side, not engage with it at all, and just go out and like make out with a bunch of girls at like, and then I would go home like in the holidays in the summer and in the winter, and would go back into these accountability circles where people would lay their hands on me and pray the demon of homosexuality out of me, and would try, but it was something that I was wanting to do, because I didn't believe that I was okay, and that this needed to be fixed, and it was really through that process of like back and forth where I came to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I can't be so conflicted all of the time. luckily I had this person at a church that I started to go to in Vancouver who was like, you know what, why don't you just try and see if it's okay with God that like you being queer. And it was like the first time that I was given permission for that to be maybe okay. And it was like everything was lifted off of me. I didn't continue to engage in the church, but that was fine. It was like this, I got this resolution there. And so after that had happened, I ended up coming out to my mom because she was the last person that I wanted to tell, because I knew that she was going to be okay with it, which is like kind of a weird way to think about it. But I wasn't okay with it. And so I needed to go through this process of being okay in my body and in my bones. And so I came out to her and she was fine with everything and whatever. But it was a really hard process to get there. And then it was, coming out as, I felt like I had to come out as a lesbian. And so I was like, I am a lesbian. And then I felt like within the community that I was a part of, there wasn't really space for bisexuality or queerness. There was a lot of stigma around being attracted to men. At the time I identified as a woman. And so, that was really hard. And eventually I felt like, no, I understand myself enough to know that like, I'm queer and I'm attracted to all genders, and I don't need this label, and that's okay. And then transness also and non-binary stuff was like not at all something that was discussed at home. That was just not a thing at all that was discussed at home. Like sometimes at home you would get the like, oh, the gay people and they need to be fixed and whatever else, but like trans was not a thing. And so I had a couple of friends that I had met through the queer community who were trans, and it was the first time that I was like introduced to the concept of it. And even with that, it wasn't straightforward because I knew that I didn't identify as male and I didn't want to identify as male, and there wasn't this linear process that I wanted to go through to get to some goal. And once I found like the terminology of non-binary and understanding the flexibility and fluidity of gender, it made a lot more sense to me, so that I could like be able to some days, like when I'm feeling and more feminine, being able to present that way, and being able to when I'm just having that fluidity. And I think that sometimes having language can restrict things, and sometimes like having language can be so affirmative that something is actually real and exists. And that's what kind of happened for me with non-binary identity, is because it is so vast. It allows me space to be able to continue to explore myself and how I want to express and be in my gender.
Awesome. Yeah, it's lovely because it's limitless as opposed to limiting, which is, it sounds like everyone experienced before there was the recognition of, phew, I actually can be who I am, and the people that love me still are going to love me. So thank you for sharing. And of course, I would be remiss as the co-chair of Pride if I didn't ask, what's your first memory of like a Pride event, or maybe it was a film screening, or, as Chrissy mentioned, there's lots of folks that are engaged in Pride-like activities, and it's not necessarily, with the stamp of Pride on it. So, yeah, what's the first memory of Pride that you have?
My first would be Toronto. It was huge. And when I saw them all coming down the street was lined, like literally lined with millions. And I thought to myself, are all these people gay as well? But then I realized, oh no, look, P flag. Oh, parents and families of gay lesbians. And I thought, okay, well that's pretty cool. They're supporters. And that's pretty much what it was about, was all these people lining the street, not to gawk at the spectacle, but to actually be there to support these people who are standing up proudly. And I thought that was fantastic. And then I came to Vancouver and celebrated Pride in Vancouver, and it was very, very close to the same thing. But the festival afterwards, was the best part about it, was just going down to the festival and being able to fellowship with everybody else that's either gay or supporting gay people, etc. too. And then I thought about it a little more and thinking, okay, if a lot of these people don't come out every day, why are we just celebrating one day? We should be celebrating every day. But I mean, that would be a lot of money to put on, wouldn't it?
True.
My first Pride specific event was after I had had my realization that this can be okay. I went home and the Belfast Pride Parade was happening, and it at the time was super small, and it was just people who, I don't know where they had even found them, these Amnesty International signs that said love is a human right, and so it was just people with those signs walking through the street, and then at every corner there were evangelical Christians yelling with speakers and stuff like that at people, with big signs and stuff like that, and that was it was a pretty amazing experience to feel like I could be in that space at home.
Mm-hmm.
I think mine was 1994 when I first moved down here. I had some friends that were very familiar with the gay scene on Davie Street, and she was so excited for me to see my first Pride. So I did, Pride Parade. This was before me finding out the parties and everything else and before. So after that, I never got to see the parade very much. But anyways, going to the Pride Parade for me I was scared. I was scared because there were so many people that were so free with themselves that they could just be who they are. But I was afraid. I was afraid of just myself and just being in that place. But I was excited at the same time. So it was very electric. The emotions were definitely everywhere. We watched the Pride Parade. I remember GVNCS going by. I remembered all the clubs and stuff. And it was just so exciting and beautiful. And we hung out, we went to the festival grounds, we met with a lot of people, we were friends hanging out at the beach, and there's a community that is larger than I ever thought it was. But to be able to see that freedom and feel that excitement was like chasing a dragon, and having to be able to chase that every single time, to know that that excitement and celebration is what I see every year and what I look at every year. And now that Pride comes upon us, and what Al was saying or what he was mentioning about looking at not celebrating every day and who we are, but to be able to allow ourselves to honor ourselves in that way, and to be able to allow ourselves to have that freedom within ourselves, and to be able to allow ourselves that electricity, to be able to stand up and say, I am gay, and look at somebody straight in the eye without fear, without anything in our bodies to deny or defy who we are as gay or lesbian. And it was that moment that kind of changed everything for me in that area. I was able to be freer with myself. I was able to accept and honestly say, yes, I am gay, and look in a mirror and say, yes, I am gay. And it's not just the parade itself, it's the celebration of being able to celebrate our failures, our successes every year, every day. And one day we come together and we celebrate all of those, whether it's negative or positive. And I'm grateful for the opportunities, especially for being able to have Vancouver Pride and the prides around the world. Having to be gay in a community or saying I'm gay, and you see this with a lot of younger people that come out, it's like automatically people think it's just about sex. It's not sex. It's not how well you are at it. It's everything else. It's a community that you belong to, and it's being able to honor and respect who you are and respect the community that is involved with it. So by looking at that, it was just, it's amazing. I mean, I would go back and the 20 years ago and relive that moment again, because it was so beautiful. I mean, I'd say every Pride after that is just something new for me too. And I'm really grateful for the amount of people that come out and support every year, and people that are gaining the knowledge and understanding of who we are as human beings, not by the stereotypes or the titles we hold, but who we are as human beings. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis.
One of the best prides I had was Travis was actually the reigning princess that year. So he needed a driver, so I was driving his car, right? And my boyfriend at the time, his mother was in town, and he had brought her to the Pride Parade. So I had bought a dozen roses, and they were sitting on the seat. So when I saw him on the street there, I literally put the car in park, jumped out of the car, grabbed the rose, went to my boyfriend, handed him in front of everybody. And I get back to the car, and there's Desiree. You had to steal my parade, didn't you? It's what we make of the parade, you know. I mean, I was in love with this man, and it was like, it's a perfect opportunity for his mother to see that he's got a nice, fine man that loves him, you know. Fortunately, that didn't work out, but, well, it was a memory.
Well, and I think it's emblematic of, like, Pride is an expression of love, and, you know, for many people, and you know, we know that Pride can be a beacon and a lightning rod. It can be both of those things. So, Fatima, did you have a? I mean, you've taken a ton of images over the years at Pride events.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
And I have such a mixed relationship to Pride. I have very mixed feelings. So to go to your question of like the first Prides, I came in 1990 and Celebration 90 was on. And that's when they changed the dates from June to August. And that's why we have Pride in August as opposed to everybody else who has it in June. And I'm pointing at that photo. That's the Pride. So when I first saw Pride, I just saw very, very few blips of Indigenous people and people of color. But I saw a sea of whiteness. And to me, it just, again, validated this thing of like, you can't be queer. You know, or if you're queer, you come out into that. And you have to be like that. You have to get your leather jacket, cut your hair short, or be very high femme, or whatever it was, you know. Either bought your femme for lesbians, and then it was, you know, a uniform, and you couldn't express your culture or any of that stuff. So anyway, so Pride to me was more of that. And so a bunch of us got together in 1993. And it was actually people from the Squamish Nation and from the different feminist organizations. We have women of color, especially black women, were very prominent, like coming up, doing stuff, you know, kicking ass around anti-racism and all that. And that's some of the history that, you know, T was talking about that's missing from the story, which I'm doing my PhD on, actually. And so that photo behind Travis was taken, it's part of a bigger photo. This is the bigger photo of that photo over there. And this is like a lot of people of color and Indigenous people who came together. And this kind of history is not talked about, you know, in terms of the broader histories of Pride, but that there was all this like coming together of people on the margins of, you know, that broader queer, actually it wasn't queer, it was actually gay, and then some lesbian, and no trans, or very few trans people. Anyway, so I mean, that was, you know, this memory is my actual memory. And from that moment on, because I realized how important it was to be visible, even though, I mean, I have problems with these politics, right? Like on an intellectual way, but in a personal feeling way, I feel the same. I feel the euphoria. That weekend's my favorite weekend of the year. I love the partying and the coming together and, you know, and of course getting smashed. But just feeling like completely, it's okay, like, sorry, but fuck you, you know? It's okay to be us kind of thing. But then it's not okay to be us for a lot of people. And I think that what's happened recently, and I don't know if we'll be talking a little, maybe in one of the questions, but what's happened about the reminder that pride is political is, really, really key. But I don't think it's a contradiction to how it makes us feel, in that we get to be more than just what the newspapers show pride to be, right? So, because we're all making it our own. So I take that occasion, and also when I'm photographing the things that don't make it into the magazines. The people who are not on the front cover, right? Lately, people of color, queers of color, indigenous queers, two-spirit queers are in fashion, but they haven't always been, right? And so I think that there's potential but the biggest potential for pride for me is that it allows people to see what's out there. So I think it's important, even though there are problems with the politics of representation, I think it's important to represent, to be seen, to be there, to say, it's okay, There's all kinds of us. Right. So anyway, I have these mixed feelings. I have a love-hate, but I've never missed a pride. Even when I'm, even the year that Tricone stepped down because we didn't march because we were in support of Black Lives Matter, and the pullout from, around the cops and so on. I showed up to photograph and to see who was there and what was happening, to pass it on to everyone else. And I think it was still important to kind of show up, in a sense, even not in it, but to say we're here, and we're watching, and we'll be back.
And there's lots still to happen. And I know for that year, the Pride Parade, as a board, I'm one of the few board members that's still on the board from that year, and I deeply regret that we didn't get to where Black Lives Matter Vancouver wanted us to be as quickly as we should have, and have recently said that quite publicly and personally to members of BLM Vancouver. Yeah, it took us too long to get there. We're there now, but it took us too long to get there. T, I do want to get to you around this question because I think you're the only person born and raised in Vancouver. So do you have a particular first memory of a Pride event? Were you DJing or?
So Pride, my family, I lived just off of Nelson and Bidwell. And so we were in the thick of it. And so we would all always just get up early in my family and just go watch the parade. Like I said, my family was very accepting. There's just, there's the stigmas around children. But I know to have had pride in my life forever. I would say for people that don't get to have that with their families, I think it's important. I have a different view of pride just because for me with DJing, it was like the busiest time and it's a week that you don't know what your bed looks like. You recall being there at some point, but it's just nonstop with the different events and the different parties and being able to be a part of other people's history. I always thought was really cool that I was able to be I was the soundtrack to your life. But yeah, so I have a different view of pride than most, for sure.
Fair enough. Yeah, a very, very busy week if you're a DJ or on the board. It's exhausting and not as fun, I think, as it is for you, maybe. So, Fatima, you brought it up, and it is an important question around how pride has evolved. And I think I want to add to that, So how has Pride evolved? So how has it changed? But, you know, if you had the voice of Vancouver Pride, what would you like to see more of, less of? How, you know, how can it be better, different?
Are you asking me?
Have at it. Yes,
anyone.
please. Yeah, everybody.
Well, I see Al itching to answer that one.
I was only going to add that recently, what are we on, year 5 now? We didn't, like, with the Indigenous, we always found our people, like, literally stuck in the corner of a bar while everybody else partied. And we thought, okay, this is nuts. Why are we doing this? So we actually had a sponsor that gave us their bar so that the Two-Spirit could go and celebrate Two-Spirit Pride.
Nice.
And that's what the GVNTS has been hosting, you know, for the past 5 years. And it took off really fast. And then every year it grew more and more, you know, and it was more or less what we did was we opened our stage to anybody that just wanted to play, you know. We didn't care if you had talent or not. You want to sing, you know. We had one guy bring his guitar and he sang to us. And it was wonderful, you know. We've had people go, I've never done this before, but I'd love to give it a shot. There's our stage. Please feel welcome, you know. And it was wonderful to see people realize, hey, I might be able to do this, you know. And they pick it up and next thing you know, they're running for chief or princess, which we always host around Pride, you know.
Yeah. So like a carved out,
Yeah.
safer
Yeah.
space where the people there look like you.
And that's just it, you know, and nobody's judged and everybody's having a good time. And, you know, if somebody gets a little messy, we just kind of say, okay, your night's going to end early, you know. But we treat them with the respect. you
Well,
know,
and
it's-
safety
yeah.
is important,
Yeah.
right, in our community. That's
Exactly, you know,
that's a
because
huge piece of it.
We need to be responsible for them getting home as well, you know, so if we have a driver, somebody will actually drive the person home. You know, we've had that, so it's like, it's a matter of taking care of your own when others just are taking care of their bar.
Well, that's a beautiful evolution of a celebration of pride. Fatima?
Well, you know I have lots to say, but I'll
I
say
love
by
that you
example.
have lots to say.
No, I think one of the things that I think pride is its own beast, right? And it's that beast. I actually hate that beast, but it's got lots of good parts to it, right? And so I wouldn't, you know, I think you need a huge list to say, okay, you got to do this and this and this and this. But what I would say is, like, one thing that's been good is making amends, being open to making amends, all the things that went wrong in the past, and when people knock on the door and go, you know what, that's not okay, listening, doing what needs to be done, right? So the example of Black Lives Matter, for example, Indigenous people not opening Two-Spirit when not at the front of the parade, and then learning to put them at the front of the parade, creating spaces that everybody could be at, and then lots of different events over the week. So like expanding it to a week, so there's more room for everything. So those things I think worked, but I'll give one example. Well, actually, when we did that float, we were 140 in 143 floats or something like that. They put us at the ends, nobody would ever see us. But since then, that's changed, and there's been more effort, and I think that that's to understand that it's important for people in the audience to see certain people marching and to remember that they exist, right? And then, but one example I would give, just to give another piece of history, is when they changed the date, when you change the date from the Monday to the Sunday. So it used to be on the public holiday Monday, and then they changed it to Sunday. And that was to kind of accommodate the Americans coming over the border, because they didn't have a holiday, and then, you know, just to party more, have more people to party. But what happened was it eliminated a lot of people who were involved with Powell Street Festival, which is a lot of people of color, a lot of women, you know, and a lot of, you know, the stragglers that are not considered central at Pride at that time. And Pride has made amends and worked with Powell Street and is co-doing events and so on. So even though they haven't changed the date back, they've done what they can. And I think those are the kinds of things that need to continue to happen, like just making amends, listening, hearing. So it could be a million things, but just being open to, because we won't be able to change what it is. And if you made Pride, in a sense, like it's political, but if you made it less of a celebration as well, that could also be problematic. So I actually think it's not to reform it, let it be what it is, but to add to it, to pay attention, you know, all those things. So that's what I would like to see Pride do.
There's Vancouver Pride, there's East Side Pride, there's Surrey Pride.
And those are important.
Yeah,
those are great.
and I mean, GVNCS was even invited out to Kelowna last year to open their celebration.
Yeah.
We've been invited to Victoria to open their celebration.
Yeah.
And that too, and the fact that we're moving around, we're really seeing the growth of the Pride movement itself, and it's really, really wonderful to see that all these little towns that you didn't think existed actually have a community in there wanting to be recognized as well.
And those are radical because they are actually shaking up their town.
Right, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing, one more thing is money, because we're living in a capitalist society and people don't have money. And so when Pride can offer money to DJ, money to participate, to create work and art and all that, and spread it around to the people who haven't had that money, I think that's also important to do. Because, I mean, that's not fixing anything, but it's doing a little piece of repair, right? And I think that's important. So I think just doing what you can should be the mantra. Doing a little more every time.
The smaller communities in Pride and how they're growing, but you take in consideration the look and the way that they are, the smaller communities, they're under one umbrella. They're under one LGBTQ umbrella. Whereas you look at City of Vancouver, the society, this is in my own opinion, obviously, in society, I feel that we've been segregated into different areas. We've been segregated to just our own color. You know, our flag has broken up from a rainbow flag of one umbrella to several different colors. And looking at that, you find there are political issues because of that. Because of, well, again, in my opinion, I find that the political issues that arise from it are because of who we are, who our rights are, when we fought in the history for those rights, the same rights that we lived by all of these years to this point. But now that we're segregated into different areas, we're fighting for separate rights. But we're all LGBTQ, we're all under that one umbrella. You know, whether it was bears, cross-dressers, drag queens, fetishes, anything like that, lesbians, gays, everybody was under one umbrella. And seeing that, like even people of color, we're all there. But now that the flag has broken up into several different colors, the rainbow is not a rainbow anymore. You know, we've recently, since I've been involved with LGBTQ, we've added the pink, we've added the, you know, the triangles, we've added, you know, and it's just, it continuously adds and adds and adds. And the more that it adds, the more it separates us. The more that we are separated, we're not under that umbrella anymore. So a lot of politicals arise from it. Whether you look at the parade, I mean, going back to the smaller communities, you don't see that. You see one group of people celebrating the same thing. But when you come through to Vancouver, the larger cities, you see it all separated. And looking at it and realizing this is what it's good to teach about the history is the fact that we walked this path. There are many that walked this path and were beaten along the way for what we see today as to being able to celebrate. We couldn't just celebrate, we celebrated underground. You know, we celebrate within our own homes. These smaller communities that are coming out and doing what they can to make things happen in their communities is still part of that path. Who's to say, because they're just starting to do their celebrations, that they're not going through what we went through 30 years, 40 years ago? And then you're looking at it now, people of color, Two-Spirit people, and you mentioned that we didn't have a place. You know, it took us many years to be able to walk with our regalia. Culturally, we don't wear regalia in clubs. So we can't really be ourselves as a Two-Spirit organization or Aboriginal organization in a club. We don't separate ourselves out from the LGBTQ or the rainbow flag. We are Two-Spirit because we hold both those spirits, and it is our birthright. And looking at all of that, I know I had to mention that just because, in my opinion, I see a lot of what we've been through in Pride and working with Pride as a partnership was that we not only were politicals in and around with other areas of the parade itself, but within our own Indigenous people, with each other. That is sad. It's sad that us as Two-Spirit people have to be political with other Indigenous groups because we're one people. All of us are. You know, I mean, you look at, we're living in a pandemic right now, which has no discrimination values to it, not because of how much money you have, not because of anything that you carry. It hits you all the same, which makes us one people. And it's a reminder every day that we live for next year with this pandemic that we are one people. Thank you.
I think it's interesting, Travis, because I think about we're all in this storm together, but I know that the craft that I'm in probably has more stability, and because I have a lot of privilege, and so I agree we're all in the same storm. I just don't know that we're all in the same boat. Do you know what I mean? You know, and you were talking earlier about, you know, the families that you've been supporting, that it's grown, you know, over COVID, and I think that those families aren't the families in my building, because again, my building is, you know, folks that are, you know, 2 incomes, that kind of thing. I think there's been some equalizing, and I also think that some of the differences have been elevated as well. But I really appreciate your opinion around that idea that when we see smaller communities proudly showing the rainbow flag, in many ways, you're right. I think they are 30 years behind us. And that part of that growth is recognizing that sometimes we need to separate and carve out our own spaces to be able to come back together. That's my hope. I feel like we're kind of teenagers. You know, when teenagers have to say, I'm not like my parents. And eventually they actually come back very close to being their parents. I can say I'm a lot more like my mother. But yeah, I feel like, you know, we're in that place of being teenagers as we carve out space for ourselves and try to figure out who we are as, you know, a queer white settler. Who am I? And I hang out with other queer white settlers to figure that out, and then connect with my, you know, Black queer settler friends to talk about that. So there is this shared and this, you know, separate space. But my hope is that it all gets pulled together.
Yeah, just say one thing. Like, you know, the person who helped organize that float, Karen Joseph from Squamish, now they do Reconciliation Canada as a float. And it's from her and other people, other Indigenous queers who were part of our float that year in 1993. And we're all really close friends. And they said, you know what, enough of bringing us under your umbrella, you know, people of color. That Indigenous people need to organize as, you know, Two-Spirit and Indigenous, and you do your thing. And then the Black women said, hey, and you know what? We need to do our thing. And that started to happen. And I think in a way, it kind of, we learned respect for each other's ways, and we needed that process to be able to come together. Mm-hmm. If we didn't separate out, And we had to learn, because I think lots of times, like people of color were just saying, oh, Indigenous people, you're just the same as us, without ever realizing we're on colonized land, right? So, I mean, I think those kinds of things, we thought we were friends with everybody, you know, and everything was all the same and whatever. And then we learned a really hard lesson that we were actually like, we were responsible for shutting up Indigenous people, you know, as people of color. And we didn't mean to, but that happened. So, sorry? No, exactly, all the time. But also, I think that allows us to come together with even more respect, right?
Yeah.
So I hear you, but you know, because that it becomes hard, you know, to actually see the splinters, and especially when it becomes about like being mean with each other. That's really harsh. But I think eventually, the people who learn to respect each other do come together with much more love, I think. I believe.
So Chrissy, I'm wondering, because you are participating on 3 different levels really of Pride, because while you're not a member of the Vancouver Pride Society, you do report some of your activities to us so that we have a stronger sense of what's going on across Canada and internationally. So in terms of the evolution of Pride, maybe a couple of highlights, and then I want to get to our theme for this year.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just give some context of how I got involved in Pride, because I was not a huge fan of Pride when I got involved, and like part of it was definitely internalized homophobia from like my past and whatever. And when I finally came out the first time or whenever that was, I was like, yeah, okay, I'm queer, but like you don't need to wear rainbows, you don't need to flaunt it, you don't whatever, and which was my internalized homophobia, and then I was a student and was off for the summer and tried to apply for a bunch of Canada Summer jobs and didn't get any of them other than the random one that I put in for Pride as a volunteer coordinator. And I was like, well, I guess I'm gonna do this. And as a volunteer coordinator, you gotta really ramp people up with the rainbows. And so it was like the opposite of how I felt. And part of it was the internalized homophobia. Part of it was like, Pride is corporate. Pride is not me. Pride is like, yeah, it's all partying, all drinking. Like that's not what I wanted to do, and it's not political. And so I went into this role and had to really get on board with Pride, and it was hard initially, but I then realized that at the time Pride was also being run mostly by cis white gay men, and at the AGM after I was done my like 3-month job or whatever, I was like, I don't see myself here. I don't see what you're doing to try and include other folks other than your own community. And so then I joined the board. And however many years later, now we're here, closing in on 10, I think. But it was, I saw Pride as this platform for change, because Pride is recognized globally. Pride has a lot of power that it's not necessarily using, and it has the opportunity to really make change at various different levels, and I think that we're starting to see that, even though the change has been very, very slow. And so yeah, within Vancouver Pride, I was on the board when there were no staff, and went through that process of like, then you get money and then you can get staff. But before that, it was like all the board were running the show and running the parade, and like with all the volunteers, of course, but like making all those decisions, it was all volunteer run. And like when you don't have much money, it's very hard to make systemic changes within an organization as well. So like it's there were things that we were trying to change, but it was much slower moving than now, when there's actually resources to be able to put into staffing, to be able to put into giving like grants out to other organizations to be able to have different communities lead their own events rather than putting on events for people. Yeah, I think that I've definitely seen a shift. And I agree with you. I think it is a beast. In different places as well, has really, really harmed people. And that's really unfortunate. And I think that it is mostly because of white supremacy. I think it's mostly because of like cis folks not acknowledging their privilege. I think it's racism. I think it's, yeah, and I don't think that for a lot of prides, they, around so-called Canada, they have the resources to be able to do that work well. And I think that that's starting to change now, because in the last couple of years, there's been funding that's been given to prides in pretty significant ways. And I think that now we're starting to really see that change. And the national organization Fierté Canada Pride is really trying to do a lot more like education and awareness around BIPOC inclusion, around racism, around white supremacy, to be able to give prides, whether they're a tiny remote pride in like Northern Ontario or like Winnipeg Pride or Toronto Pride, be able to help people have the resources to have those conversations. So I think that the platform that Pride has is, I still have hope for it, but I'm still very critical of it, and always will be, because I don't think that it, and I don't know if it's ever a space where everyone is going to feel included. And I've seen, especially in Vancouver Pride, doing the work, and making mistakes and doing the work and making mistakes. And I think that, like you said, with the making, like doing reconciliation work essentially, with communities that they've harmed, it's been, I think that process of acknowledging harm and doing reparative work is really where all prides need to be, because that's where the change is going to happen, and that's where you're going to start building bridges, not for the sake of like your one or two random BIPOC people in the organization, but so that you can actually have voices heard, and so that you can empower folks to be able to have a say, make changes the way that they want to make changes, and actually have inclusion rather than just tokenization.
T, evolution of Pride, in your opinion?
Yeah, I agree a lot. I, being the token of many pride parties, it's something that you feel, and as a Black lesbian, it was almost like you were in an honorable position of being able to DJ these very cis, white, gay male parties, and you know, it was just, it's interesting because I can look back as, how do I word it, like, I don't look back on those times as negative as some folks do, but I can look back now with with the knowing what I know now, it stings a little bit different now. Like the memory of it in the moment was like, wow, I've made it and I'm going forward. But as like now it's like, oh, like you were being used as, we have a Black DJ and she's a lesbian. Well, she's plus sized. Like it was very, I can tick, 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 tick. But as far as what seeing forward for the evolution of Pride, I haven't really, I'm trying to think when I haven't really been to a lot of Prides in previous years because I didn't like, for myself, so much of the nudity aspect of Pride. I understand it, and I have no issues with anybody for doing so. The fact that you're so comfortable in your body to do that, like, is great. But I didn't like that any time that I would say to my employers or of different various jobs, that they would be like, well, oh yeah, you're gonna go get naked and, you know, have your boobs on a bike, and all the like stereotype that was brought with it, I didn't particularly like. So when I was no longer DJing in a float and I was only DJing at the parties, I stopped going to Pride Parade itself. Until I guess, I don't know if it was it 20, I guess it would have been 2019 Pride. I went to that one with my partner, and I was like, whoa, people are dressed. Wait a second, is that an Indigenous float? I was like, oh, this is actually really cool. This is a pride that my partner at the time was pregnant, and I was like, oh, this is a pride that I want to take my kids to. Like, not that there was anything shameful previously. That's not what I'm trying to say. But hopefully, going forward, if the parade is what that'll even look like in the future of after all this. But the being able to have more, as opposed to it being non-POC'd people running the parties and running the whole organization of it, it being more like, okay, well, we can get the funding and maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like being like, okay, here's people of color, you throw your parties, as opposed to being decided for and what the main parties would be and things like that. I think would be great for the evolution, as it just be like, okay, here we are, we're Pride, and you know, you can do this party, you do that party. Going forward, I think would be a great addition.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kind of like Toronto, you know, where Toronto has parties for people of color, and one of the best parties is Blockorama.
Yeah.
It's black run, black, envisioned and everything, and it's a real people of color space, and it's. Yeah,
I do get
it's
how
so amazing.
Oh, sorry.
No.
I do get, however, being that the Black community in Vancouver is also like about this big, and then attached to it being this big, there's about this many that are queer, and then there's about like this many that are like out. So I do get that there's limitations around that for Vancouver. But it would be nice to see going forward.
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, it's those carved out, safer spaces that are a reflection of like creation from beginning to end, not in a corporate or colonized way, right? So that the people are provided the tools that they need to do what works for them.
Well, it would also be nice in terms of that it's not just like POCs throwing a party like for them by them, but more of like that it's the integrated party, right? Like it's nice that we've all been able to at some point be able to make our own safer spaces because we've had no other choice. Or have been put into those types of things. But I think that it being like, this is the Pride event created by a POC, if there's like, for Indigenous ways being brought into how that party would look, and it being like, as non-POC, you're going to experience Pride our way, as opposed to us always fitting into Pride done.
Yeah, so instead of the core being whiteness, the core would be much more, mixed.
For sure.
Yeah, that would be a great thing to do.
There are those that can't afford the high door covers that usually falls with Pride. So we always covered ours at $5. $5, come on in, And we'd feed them a meal and the whole bit, and there was always like coming home. You know what I mean? And that's how our spaces made us feel safe. You know? And when people would come and say, oh, well, we're going to go to the Indigenous one, they feed you. You know, it's like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, but I mean, like the party would still just be going and going and going, and we'd wrap it up by 11, so in case anybody wanted to go downtown to the clubs when it's all hopping and going, you know, it gave them that opportunity, you know. Go ahead, we're done.
What are the things that make it inviting and accessible? And finances are definitely a big part of that, right?
Exactly
in
that,
our big city, big diverse city.
Yeah.
And to that point too, feeding. Yes. That's such a POC thing to do. It's like, all right, you need to eat, but it's like when you do the like the after Pride. I'm not meaning to sound like I'm disrespecting Pride, but the like you'll see like a bunch of like liquor tents in the like now 19 plus section. There's a few food trucks, but like every time I'm like, I'm hungry. Like, what's happening here? There's no one feeding me. Like, it would be that incorporation is much more, because it's very, I don't know a single person of color that the first thing when you step foot in the house and you've taken your shoes off at the door, that you now are like, what do you want to eat? What do you want to drink? Dinner's going to be, or, you know, what do you want till then? That it's that is like community that that's one thing that's never been a thing I saw in Pride. And until I was older that I really realized, oh, that's a POC thing. That's why it's not really there.
Interesting. I mean, I really love it. And, you know, someone who's like Scottish and French, same thing, add a glass of wine, though. To it. Because I think it's about family, and it's about making people feel at home, right? And if Pride wants to be a safe, like, home for folks to land, then nurturing them and nourishing them is important, and food's a part of that. So I love that. I'm definitely taking that back. All of this.
I think that with evolution of Pride is evolution of everybody else. I mean, for myself, it took 3 years before I was able to take my children to Pride or have them a part of me during Pride, because the evolution of the other societies weren't moving along with that. And it wasn't just about nude and tits and ass, and you know, it was about family. It was about the communities that came together to support and celebrate together. So it did take 3 years as part of my inclusive foster parenting. It took me 3 years to get the balls up and actually just take my kids and deal with the backlash later. But and it was like, okay, photos, okay, sure, you know, my kids are popping their heads out, and then their makeup and their colors and everything else. You know, it's who we are and who we want to be, and how we're going to teach our generations that come after us. My children don't ask what's so different about people. My children don't ask, why is this person, but they have recently asked, did you get married, Mommy? Why did you marry a man? You know, and this and that, and why didn't you save the ring? You know, type of thing. So their understanding is that it's free to love. I mean, I've had the gay question asked a couple of weeks ago, and it's freedom of love. I said, it's your choice and freedom of love. I said, it's all you have to remember. And you know, so their questions are valid. They're very smart people. Doesn't matter how old they are, they're very smart people, and they're always going to remember things that they've done in their lifetime, as we do up to now. You know, so
bringing in like this great kind of perspective of also the outer world, right? Like everybody else is looking at what they want Pride to be, right? And you know, so I think it's one thing for us to vision, but we're living in a capitalist society that wants it to be, you know, a particular thing and more commercial and blah blah blah, and then there are people who want to make it less queer, you know, less gay, less lesbian, less everything, right? So I think that when we're envisioning, I think Pride has to be brave enough to be, that's in this evolution, to be what we want it to be rather than what the world wants it to be, because everybody wants to consume Pride. They all want Pride like this candy, you know?
Yeah. And finding that, is there balance, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think that's
Yeah.
that's a big part of Pride's evolution is, do we lean in around the equity piece, or do we try to be everything to everyone, which is incredibly challenging, and I think is part of the reason why we didn't land at the engagement with police, for instance, as quickly, because we were trying, I think, to find balance where we actually needed to swing the other way.
Oh, I liked how like I loved how you said about like the flipping with the event, so that it's not like white centered anymore. And I also think that like in the future that's something that like the organization can do. So organizationally, with FCP, the way that they're doing it is they've flipped it so they have these leadership councils, which are not advisory councils, but are leadership councils, because you can advise and then people can just ignore you. But they have these leadership councils, which are trans and gender diverse, women, Two-Spirit, and then folks of color. And they're the ones that make the decisions, and then the white people on the board just do the work. And so I feel like organizations, if you can like shift that to that way so that you're really centering the most marginalized folks and having them make the decisions for the organization and guide it, can then really make that change happen, but not put that labor on those people either. Is like having people who have the privilege to be able to then continue to do that work, while paying people for their labor of guidance and leadership as well.
So really centering people with underrepresented identities.
Yeah.
In the presentation of Pride as opposed to the work of Pride.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So I just want to say thank you so much for the honor and privilege of spending time with you today, for you choosing to share who you are, little bits of your history and your reflections. And I'm really hopeful that we get together again, closer, together very soon. I wish you all an amazing Pride season, and I look forward to when we can gather and hug.
And thank you.
Thank you.